Right, okay, good afternoon everybody. Thanks for stopping by and resting your feet and listening to me. My name is David Catanach. I'm the director of the BSGA, which is the British Sign and Graphics Association. I'm going to give us hopefully a short presentation on the maintenance and inspection of signs. Although it's UK orientated, a lot of it is common sense and a lot of it will apply to sign companies around Europe. So there's some interesting stuff here for people to take part in. We have planning regulations in the UK, and what tends to happen is a lot of people flout them. They don't pay attention to what the regulations are. They make these signs. To whatever specification they want that don't comply with regulations. And this is what we're trying to introduce into sign companies to understand that they have a legal obligation to make signs that actually fit the requirements of legislation. Now, this legislation comes in the UK under a guideline book that is freely available to all sign companies. The number of sign companies that actually read it, we don't know, but we do know that a lot more sign companies are buying this book because it's being reprinted. So there is a desire for sign companies to want to make sure they're doing things properly. What this book refers to is a sign and an advertisement. Now, what is the difference between a sign and an advertisement? Well, the actual answer is nothing. We're all signs. But for the purposes of this, we will say the advertising control system covers a wide range of advertisements and signs, so we'll just lump them all together. So that includes posters and notice boards, placards and boards, fascia signs and projecting signs, pole signs, canopy signs, models and devices, advanced signs and directional signs, estate agent boards, captive balloon advertisements, although it doesn't cover balloons in flight for some reason, flag advertisements, there is one more coming up, hopefully, yep, price markers and displays. It also includes traffic signs, town and village name signs as well. And finally, although you can't quite see that, it says the memorials and railway signals are not regarded as signs. But as you can see, there's quite a load of signs that come under this legislation in the UK. Now, by the way, when we design a sign, it's made up of components, and these components have to be put together in such a way that when you apply a force to the sign, it creates a load, and it's that load that goes back to the structure itself that all the calculations are made from on how well that sign is going to stay put. So therefore, any company that manufactures anything in steel or aluminium that creates a load path will need to conform to a European regulation, EN 1090. If you're not making the structure yourself, you should ask the person making it for you that it conforms and get them to confirm that it conforms. Because if it doesn't conform, it will fall back on you as a supplier of the sign. Also, what follows now is on the premise that no one makes a sign to fail. We're all making signs that work. But what we're talking about is what happens when the sign does fail and what to do to prevent that from happening. Please change. There we go. So who applies for this application? Well, the first person to do it is the owner of the sign. You can do this on behalf of the owner. But I would point out, sorry, I'll just go back to that one. Do not fit a sign without checking that you have planning permission to fit the sign. Because if you do, it falls back on you to take the sign down at your cost. Now, the standard condition of a sign is that it must be kept in a safe condition. And who's responsible for that? Well, the person responsible is, unless otherwise specified, the supplier of the sign is responsible for the design, the material specification, the construction, that's including the construction methods, the technical drawings and calculations, and the installation methods. That's what a sign company is responsible for. In other words, you must supply something that does not endanger persons or property. Maintenance. Now, you as a sign company are not obliged legally in the UK to offer a maintenance program for any signs you supply. However, there may be an onus on you and an expectation to support the maintenance of the sign once it's in place. Now, it's rather like you buying a car, you get it serviced, but it's down to you to make sure it's serviced. The same applies to sign companies. So you must know how to support maintenance of the sign that you're supplying. And who's responsible for this maintenance? Well, it's the sign owner must maintain the sign. And a recent court case has demonstrated that this with another one in the pipeline, and I've got a case study to follow, that it proves that the owners of signs must maintain and inspect their signs. The sign company's role is simply due diligence would expect that a sign is designed and installed with maintenance in mind. You're not going to make a sign that will not be able to be maintained. You've got to be able to show how it works. Inspection instructions to accompany each sign. Now, I quote an example where you can go down to a local store and buy a kettle for €25. When you get it home, you take the kettle out, you fill it with water, you plug it in, it doesn't work. The first thing you do is you go to the instruction manual in the box. That's for a €25 kettle. If you sell a €3,000 light box, the only piece of paper you give your customer is an invoice. There's no maintenance instructions at all, and that is wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be giving instructions how to maintain the sign. Now, this advice that I'm giving you here today is meant to help you provide a better and more professional service level to your customer. But you make the commercial decision as to whether you do this or not. In other words, there's no legal responsibility at the moment for you to do this. But if you don't do it, you run the risk of running a legal problem if the sign fails. So prudence alone says, start doing this. You're giving your customer a better service, a better quality of service than what other sign companies are doing. Because other sign companies are ignoring this. On the subject of due diligence, you must really advise the customer that it is their legal responsibility under 3 separate legislations. That's planning regulations, building regulations, and health and safety regulations. They must implement a maintenance and inspection program, and for the lifetime of the sign. They can't just do it for 3 years and leave it for another 10. Now, we've written guidelines for our members. They can use that as a device to be able to show their customers that they need to maintain and inspect signs. Other important bits of legislation may affect any legal case as well. Recently, we've had a case where somebody may be tried as a director of a company for not doing their job properly. So do it in writing, and if possible, get their written acknowledgement regarding their responsibility for maintenance. That protects the sign company. Because if you're not doing it and something goes wrong, the customer can turn around and say, well, they never told me I had to look after the sign. I didn't have to maintain it. They never told me. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. Now, this is very important. Be clear on the expected service life of a sign. In other words, if you're building a sign out of wood, you know that the wood is not going to survive longer than 5-7 years. That's service life of the sign. But you may give a warranty to protect that sign for 2 years, but the sign might last for 5 years. So warranty is 2 years, lifetime of the sign is 7 years. If you don't tell your customer both at the very beginning in the UK, and something happens to that sign, under one of the British standards, it's 10 years, regardless as to whether you want it to last for 2 years or 5 years. It will be given 10 years. And we've had a case where a sign fell down after 10 years, and because the customer wasn't told that it was only going to last for 2 years, the sign company got fined for providing a sign that wouldn't fulfill the necessary. Now, warranties should be dependent on materials to make sure the sign, design life and desired life. You change your warranty to suit. There's no point telling everybody you can have a 5-year warranty, because quite obviously a banner is not going to last 5 years, whereas a steel structure is going to last 5 years. That is your decision what warranty you give. That's your commercial decision. Make sure the customer is aware at the time of quoting and invoicing what the service life is. In other words, you design a sign that goes outside their office. You tell them that sign is designed to last 10 years or 5 years or 3, whatever it is, as long as you tell them what it is. Because if you don't, under UK legislation, it will be deemed to be 10 years regardless. And that's where a lot of people are falling foul of the regulations. So always confirm these two things. And we recommend in your warranty you include a clause saying subject to the sign being maintained and inspected. Because if it's not maintained and inspected and it fails, how can you be expected to blame because the sign hasn't been looked after? You go and buy a car, and after 5 years you haven't changed the oil or checked the tyres or anything like that, and you take it back to the garage, say it's not working, they're going to say that nothing to do with us because you haven't inspected or maintained it. The same applies to the sign. And believe it or not, the number of sign makers that don't understand that concept is quite frightening. In the UK, we have a thing called BS 559. That's the British standard for sign making. So if you ignore all this, as I've been saying, what tends to happen is that the warranty kicks in. All our members are aware of this, so they know what's coming, okay? But if the service line of the sign shall be either, and this is decided if you haven't gone and told them what the service life is, it will be either as specified by the purchaser on the order, as agreed between the purchaser and the manufacturer, or as specified by the manufacturer to the purchaser. In other words, you're talking to your customer. You're telling them that the lifetime of the sign is 2 years, that's fine. You're telling them it's 10 years, that's fine. But if you don't tell them, and that something happens, BS 559 comes in, and everything is 10 years. Sorry, I flicked through that too much. Everything is 10 years. Regardless. It could be made out of paper mache, and they could actually turn around and say, well, that should last 10 years. You'd have a big row, but that's the sort of concept that we're talking about. Now, in the event of a failure of a sign, the health and safety executive are called in. The people that actually get called in by them to actually sort out the problem with the sign, he says, waiting for this to scroll down, it's the designer of the sign gets called in, the fabricator of the sign, the person that made it, the specifier of the sign, the one who specified what they want, the sign supplier, the sign company or whoever made it, the installer, the person that put the sign in place. Next is the owner of the sign, the person that actually paid for the sign, the owner of the property to which the sign was fixed, the person responsible for the maintenance of the sign, the persons or business that received a benefit of the sign. Now, by that, you could put a sign up outside here now, Saturn, the electrical shop. Saturn would be the only one. But if Saturn chose to have Seiko, JVC, Sony, all those electrical goods logos up on the sign as well, because they're getting a benefit from the sign, they will get called in to say what did they do about the maintenance of the sign. They can prove very quickly they had absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever other than give their logo in. But do you want to be part of a company that gets your biggest customer being called into an HSE examination, asking why did that sign fall down? You don't want that to happen. But they will be called in as well. So any other person or business that received the benefit from the sign will get called in. So all this information is to help design for sign companies to understand you don't want any of that to happen. So the steps we were talking about before should hopefully prevent all that, okay? Now then, meanwhile, if the case goes to court and we're talking about a sign falling down and hitting someone on the head, you as a sign company, you'll be asked for the technical drawings of design construction of the sign, and we don't mean a photograph of the site with a sign superimposed on the photograph. That is not a technical drawing. We want technical drawing means little numbers by the side and little lines saying how big the sign is, what it's made of, what the screw fixings are, what all fixings are, what the base is made from, everything. The technical drawing. If you have all that and you've done everything to standards, you're protecting yourself. If you haven't, then you could be putting anything up on the wall, and that's where things start going wrong. So technical calculations, wind loading calculations, fixing strengths and guidelines used to justify what you've supplied is actually going to suit and fit obligations. Installation instructions, you've got to make sure that you've given the installation instructions to the installer to make sure they do the job properly. Maintenance recommendations, and I'd go you back to the small kettle. You get a kettle, you get a thick book inside the kettle telling you how to look after the kettle, but a sign you don't. So if you start putting instructions, maintenance instructions in, you're then helping your customer to be able to achieve that, and you're covering yourself. Because if the sign fell down and you've told your customer that they needed to maintain it and they choose not to, it's not your fault. But if the sign fell down and you didn't tell your customer, the customer could turn around and say, well, you never told me I had to look after the sign. You don't want that to happen, okay? Small little hint, if you're doing this for your customers, I guarantee you nobody else is, until such time as everyone else catches up with giving instructions. But you will be giving your customers something they don't get from anybody else, and that in today's age gives you the edge, a USP, okay? On the subject of none of this need apply to you, in the past, people said it still works, and we've done this the same way all the time. In 20 years, we've been putting these signs up with these screws, and they've never failed. Well, unless you can prove that actually is right, technically, it's wrong. You have to prove that these things are right. Now, somebody bought a chain from a shop called Wickes in the UK to hang a sign up in a high street. The sign blew down about 2 weeks later because the chain snapped. It couldn't take the weight of the sign. No one was injured, but the person who bought the chain said it should have worked. So now he's saying, who do I claim against? Is it Wickes for having a cheap chain that doesn't work, or God for one of his acts of blowing the sign down? Not his problem. It should have worked. And that's the mentality we're trying to drill out of the industry, because there is a responsibility. It's no longer acceptable to say it's not my job to report back that the structure I'm fixing to is obviously failing and will not support the sign. Now, the copyright is by the same person that's made that comment as well. He was saying that his job is just to go and fix a sign. Whether the wall is falling down or not is not his problem. Well, actually it is. If you go ahead and fix a sign to something that is obviously not strong enough to support that sign, it's your responsibility. You're culpable to doing that. Again, get the customer involved. There we are. I've always done it like that. Always make sure that what you're doing is right, not because you've done it that way before. Always make sure that the bolts you're using are up to the specification required for the weight, the structure, the wind loading and everything else. And the warranty. It's no longer acceptable to say the warranty is until I get to the end of the road. You can't get away with that. You cannot turn around in court later on and say, well, my warranty only lasts 2 years. As I've already pointed out, if you haven't given a warranty or told the service life of the sign, it's 10 years regardless of whether you want to or not. Okay? Everyone whose name and logo is on the sign will have received a benefit from the sign and be considered responsible for its correct maintenance and inspection until proven otherwise. You saw the list. They all get dragged in. Business rates will increase on land that has not already received consent for advertising, so don't expect this to be in small amounts of money. The example I give is there was a building site and there was a small piece of land in front of the building site, and the sign company came along and put a sign on there saying there's a building being built behind. That piece of land was not part of the building, it was just a piece of grass. The owner of that land got a bill for £10,000 business rates because he's now using it for business purposes. Sign company had to come along and take the sign down. It's because they didn't check. So always check these things out. Now, insurers are looking at refusing to insure signs that are not under warranty or not being maintained and inspected. This will drive the customers to making sure that they are maintained and inspected, because insurance companies are beginning to get a bit fed up with paying out to people who've been injured, their families if they've been killed or damaged to property, because a sign has just been stuck up on a wall and not looked at for the next 10 years, and it falls down and they wonder why. So that will drive most of it because it hits people in the pocket. And also the British standard is now being looked at as a European standard. So what I'm telling you about today will apply to a lot of European sign making. And if it becomes a European standard, it comes under criminal law, not civil law. So instead of getting a fine under civil law and the criminal law, if you're found guilty, you'll go to prison. It's as simple as that. And also, when it becomes a European standard, that British standard falls by the wayside. The European standard takes precedence. So even in the UK, you will have criminal law rather than civil law. Right, planning regulations, inspection and maintenance. Under planning regulations in the UK, there are certain people that have to do this. As the landowner, the advertisement must not endanger anybody. The advertisement must be maintained, and any structure or hoarding used must be maintained in a safe condition. That is law. That you can't walk away from that and say it doesn't exist. It's already in law. And with the recent spate of signs falling down in the UK in shops, that is being looked at even more now. People are beginning to sit up and say, well, hang on a minute, there must be rules about this, and there are. There are already regulations in place. Building regulations, health and safety at work regulations, there's all these sorts of things, but an important one is corporate manslaughter. Companies that have got multi-sites at some stage have made a corporate decision not to do maintenance unless something falls off. It's called reactive. That is a corporate decision. It can be deemed corporate manslaughter under the Corporate Homicide Act. So if there's a big company with a corporate structure and a sign falls down and kills somebody, the directors can be expected to go to court. That's a very important thing that lots of owners of signs do not recognise. They think they're saving money by not maintaining signs now. In fact, they're building up something that could go wrong a hell of a lot later on. Building regulations require, again, inspection and maintenance, any services, fittings or equipment, and the Health and Safety at Work Act, maintenance in a condition that is safe and without risk. All these regulations are already in place. There's a duty of care by the owner of the sign to do all this. And this compounds that even more. It gives you the basis of why it's there. And this two little words, other thing, covers everything. An other thing is a sign. So you can't get out of it. The owner of the sign cannot get out of what their responsibilities to do. Now, inspection. You as a sign company do not have to do this, but it would be worth your while to inform your customer that they have to do it. So what types of inspection is there? Well, there's a superficial visual, i.e. just looking at the sign saying, yep, that looks all right, it's still there. Is it clean? It's still fixed? Yeah, fine. That will not pass any regulation at all. It's totally inadequate. We call this up close personal light. In other words, you can get up on a ladder and look at the sign. You can unscrew it and that sort of thing, and you can give a good old rattle. But the problem is, if I give a sign a rattle, My weight, as you can see, will be a lot more than some smaller person giving it a rattle. They might not be able to pull it off, I might. Who's to say what's right? There is no test that's agreed for tug test. So this thing called tugging signs may be all right just to see if it's fixed, but it doesn't actually mean anything, okay? A bit more up close, we do all the things we did. We got up close to it, we touched it, we looked at it, we pulled it, but we test for fixings. We make sure all the fixings are there. We test for the moisture content of structural wood. Most signs put up in front of shops will have a wooden structure behind them. All the inspections and all the crews that go and fit these signs should have a moisture meter. If they're fixing signs to basically what is water, they shouldn't be fixing signs to it. So if they're inspecting a sign and the wood is basically water, they should report that back, and that sign should come down and a new structure go back up. Electrical inspection, electrical testing, documentation of inspection results and action. That's important, because if you can't prove you've done all this, there's no point doing it. Because if something goes wrong, you need the documentary proof that you've done everything probable. And as I say, that will more likely provide proof of adequate due diligence. We're talking about due diligence here, okay? Now, the types of maintenance we have, as I said earlier, is reactive. In other words, we don't do anything until something falls off. The statutory requirements, you failed completely on that one, so unfortunately you go straight to jail or you pay a big fine. Time-based maintenance on preventative. This is slightly better, but you're doing actions on a time-based schedule. In other words, you've got 20 signs to look at today, you've got 8 hours to do it, go and do it. That doesn't give people long enough to look at the signs. It still doesn't fulfill statutory requirements. Predictive, this is the one that we recommend, obviously, because it meets statutory needs, but what it is a planned, timed inspection of signs. And the benefits are they have adequate knowledge and skills and time to perform the work. They can't just rush up to it and do it and come back. They've got to look at the sign. And it allows for repairs to be scheduled optimally and a lead time for parts and materials, minimizing inventory. If you don't do this this way, you're falling back into the middle category, and then you're falling out of the whole system anyway from doing it correct. The current situation is this, the reactive is the norm. We don't look at our signs, we don't maintain or inspect our signs until they've fallen down. Preventative is extremely rare, and predictive, the best one, you're having a laugh because nobody's doing it at all. The person's responsible for all this. The sign owner. The sign owner is the one responsible for the maintenance and inspection of the sign. They have to come up with the program to do it. The site owner has to make sure that anything attached to his site is maintaining and inspecting the sign. And any sign companies involved as well will be involved as a responsibility. You cannot sell a sign and walk away from your responsibility. You will still be responsible. The brand, in other words, if you put a sign up that's, as I said, Saturn, for example, they are responsible for all of this. Now, there's been 2 recent events in the UK which have been moved on slightly. There are incidents not necessarily caused by weather, although it did play a significant part in the problem. In March 2008, a sign 3 meters by 12 meters and 3 meters above a pavement fell down and causing serious brain damage to a passerby. The design life of the sign was 2 years. However, it had been in place for 9 years. The problem with that was the sign had never been checked for structural soundness, and some parts had decayed to the point where the structure was no longer sound. This is the very light inspection I was talking about earlier. Yeah, it's still there, it's clean, job done. That's not right. The health and safety executive prosecuted the owner of the sign and the agent for the site owner and the sign company. And this is the interesting thing. The sign owner was fined practically £500,000. That should be another naught in there, by the way. The sign maker was fined 78,000 euros and 29,000 euros in costs. Even though they denied any lasting duty to maintain the sign. The reason why they got done was because they didn't tell the sign owner that the service life of the sign was 2 years. We were talking earlier about service life. Because they didn't tell them it was 2 years, the owner of the sign said, well, I thought it was going to last 10 years. That's the problem. So they got fined nearly just over £82,000. And the question I have to ask is how many sign companies can actually stomach that, can actually survive having that sort of fine? Now, what the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, have asked us to do is to incorporate some references to inspection and maintenance in the British standard. And as I said, the British standard is being looked at as the European standard. So what happens in the UK will hopefully move across to Europe-wide as well. The problem we've got is that no two signs are the same, basically. Every day is different. Different signs, different days, everything. We've got to come up with something that covers everything. We've got an action plan. That's to amend the British standard and create a European standard. The structural design of a sign using steel and aluminium is the structure itself are covered under EN 1090. That is law. That is already in regulation, okay? The sign buyers and owners need to understand what their legal obligations are. Too many of them just walk away from it. They ignore it. Sign makers need to understand what their legal obligations are because they don't understand. They just think anyone can start a sign company. Anyone can do it. They just don't understand what it entails in terms of their legal obligations. The same goes for installers. There was a case recently in the courts where a sign was replaced and the new sign was bigger than the old sign. So someone had just put a piece of wood on the frame to the new size of the sign. And when they screwed through the sign into the back, it just went through the piece of wood. It didn't go anywhere else. And the wood was about that thick. And they wondered why it fell down. Because it weighed a third of a ton. So the sign installer has obligations as well. There are also the methods of inspection and in the future guidelines in design and construction to facilitate inspection and maintenance. Because people are beginning to sue people for failures. And if sign companies don't start picking this up now and acting upon it, they're going to get caught out later on. So at the end of it, what are you going to do about your sign company, or is this how you want to be remembered? That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? No? I can get off early. Great, thanks for listening. And if anybody wants a copy of this, just contact me at the BSGA and I'll send you a copy of this as well, okay? Thank you. I've got to clap.